Welcome back to Star Narratives, the podcast. This is accessible and relatable astrology that teaches you how to support your emotional health using the wisdom of the zodiac. I'm your host, Natha Campanella. Hey, you guys, welcome. I'm really excited to release this. This is a conversation that I'm having with my dear friend and colleague, Julia Mihas. She was on my podcast earlier in the year, and I just love talking to her. And this is something that we recorded for her YouTube channel, and I'm releasing it in podcast style. So we will be introducing ourselves at the beginning as if you have no idea who we are. But I love talking with Julia. She and I are talking about retrogrades in this episode, and we're going to be planning more of these little astrology talks. So speaking of retrogrades, Mars is going retrograde September 9th, 2020, and it's a big deal. Mars only goes retrograde every few years. So it is something that we feel when it happens. And I think that we're all going to really feel this one because Mars is in the sign that it rules, which is Aries. And Mars, because of that, is going to be making square connections. Square connections are tension that needs to be resolved with the planets that astrologers say are kind of responsible for all the 2020 chaos. So that would be Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. So should be interesting. And I am hosting a free class where we're going to dive in. We're going to talk about what it means, what to expect, how to make the most of the Mars retrograde period, because, these retrogrades are here for us to use. They really contain a lot of valuable lessons and information for us if we're paying attention. So come join me for that. I'm also going to be doing some live chart interpretation. So you will have a chance, if you're interested, to have me look at your chart and tell you where Mars retrograde is going to be showing up in your life the most strongly and give you some wisdom about that. So you can register for that on my website, nathacampanella.com. There's an announcement bar right at the top that you can find. Also, if you follow me on Instagram at Natha_Campanella_astrology, you will see me having a lot of posts about it because I'm going to be talking quite a bit about Mars. So come join me there too. And I would love to see you in class. And in the meantime, I'm really psyched that Julia and I are getting to talk about retrogrades together. I always love talking to her because although we were both trained under the same master astrologer, Jamie Kale Miller, we both come to the table with different perspectives and different knowledge. And I always love to hear what she has to say. I always learn something too. All right, enjoy.
Hey guys, I'm Julia Mihas, an astrologer in San Francisco, California. And with me today is the wonderful...
Hey, it's Natha Campanella. I am an astrologer in Boulder, Colorado. And I'm super excited to be talking with you today, Julia. Julia and I have worked together over the last handful of years, and we thought that it would be really fun to start a little video series where we talk some astrology. And today we're going to be talking about retrogrades.
Ooh, retrogrades. That's a big buzzword. A lot of people have heard of Mercury retrograde, but other things can go retrograde too.
Oh my God, speaking of, there are so many planets that are retrograde right now. And we actually typically have quite a few planets that go retrograde in the late summer. Usually they start like summer and kind of go through the fall. And we're right here right now, and you guys might be feeling some of it.
Oh my God. So what are we talking about here? Who are we dealing with?
Well, that is a good question. Let me look. Okay, so right now we currently have, and I'll list some asteroids too. We don't have to go in depth on what every single asteroid means, but I want to just give you the list so that you can get a sense of how many planets and asteroids we have retrograde. So we have Pallas Athena, we have Jupiter, we have Pluto, Saturn, we have Ceres, Neptune, Chiron, Uranus, and we are going to be having a Mars retrograde, which is coming up in September. We don't usually have Mars retrograde every year, but that's a lot.
It's a hell of a lot. And they're all pretty much, I mean, the only things we're not dealing with retrograde now actually are Mercury and Venus, which are the planets that are really, really close to the sun. So they're super inner planets. But everything like beyond Earth at this point, so Mars, I think would be, wait, which comes first, the Kuiper Belt or Mars? I think Mars, and then the Kuiper Belt with the asteroids, and then Jupiter, Saturn, all the way down to the end of them.
Yeah, and it's a lot. And we did have Venus retrograde this year, which, Venus also does not go retrograde every single year, but it's been quite a year and it will continue to be. And I think that, we're filming this in 2020. And so a lot of us are really feeling the intensity. And I think that these retrogrades really exacerbate that, especially because they give us this sense of, like we're slowed down. We're having to wade through some of the muck, some of the stuff. And so maybe, do you want to tell us what retrogrades are astrologically?
Sure. Yeah. So retrograde, when something is retrograde, it's not an actual physical phenomenon, because in the solar system, all the planets are moving forward all the time. It is an optical illusion from our perspective on Earth. And it's actually the same optical illusion that happens when, let's say you're driving and you're going 80 miles per hour in the left lane and you pass some grandma going 60 miles per hour in the right lane. If you look in your rearview mirror, the grandma will appear to be moving backwards away from you, even though both cars are going forward. So it's an optical illusion for the most part. But, astrologers find it very, very significant because it means that a planet is kind of concentrating its energy around a little cluster of degrees that are getting super, super highlighted. Yeah. How do you find retrograde significant in your practice? By transit or by natal?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I always describe retrogrades in terms of what they are doing for us, retrogrades can be uncomfortable. And that's because they, in as much as they appear to be turning backward in the sky, it sort of brings us that energy into our human lives where we have to go back and we have to look at where we've been. And, like hindsight is 2020. A lot of times what we see are the things that we haven't done so well, the things that need to be reworked or revisited. So, to use Mercury retrograde as an example, because everybody hears about Mercury retrograde. And I think everybody, if you're on social media at all and you're, watching the memes during Mercury retrograde, everybody freaks out. Yeah. And part of that is because, you have to go back and look at some of the ways that you've been having conversations, some of the things that you either have not been saying or the things that you have been saying. And there's something about those retrograde periods that make you kind of, maybe see the error of your ways, or maybe they just bring your attention to something that really needs to go, a conversation that needs to be revisited. But it can be uncomfortable because a lot of times, we don't want to go back. We don't want to have to deal with that issue again.
Mm-hmm. So it's like if you sign a contract during Mercury retrograde, it could be like, well, you might not have all the information up front. You might have to go back. You might have to renegotiate. You might have to, it's that kind of thing on a very mundane level.
Yeah. Or I have found, certain conversations that I do have during Mercury retrograde that really go pear-shaped, where you have a conversation at the beginning of a retrograde period and you end up getting into an argument with somebody and you're really mad and they're really mad and you part ways. And then through the, as the 3 or so week period progresses, because Mercury moves really fast. So Mercury retrogrades are short. Some of these outer planets, they're long. They last for months. But, what happens is that through the retrograde period, you kind of have to go back and look at what you said. And, you kind of think, oh God, I shouldn't have said that. Okay, fine. Or however it goes. And then ideally you want to go back and, have the closure with that person. But that is one of the beauties of the Mercury retrograde period, is that you do get the opportunity to kind of go back and revise what happened. Hopefully you end up learning something out of it so that you don't repeat it.
Yeah. No, I think that's very true. And a lot of modern astrologers will say that that retrogrades, even in the natal chart, can have a very sort of internal quality to them. That reviewing process, that going inward process. Do you have any retrogrades in your natal chart?
Yeah, I do. And so if you guys are listening and you're like wondering if you have retrogrades in your natal chart, what you can do is you can look for the planets that have a little, what looks like an R and a little tiny X that comes off of the tail. Because most of us do have at least one retrograde planet in our chart, because these outer planets being retrograde for several months at a time every year, more likely than not, you're going to have one or two. So I do. I have Pluto, I have Uranus, and that is it. Okay. And so you can tell me how you interpret a retrograde planet in a chart, but the way that I see it is, taking Uranus, for example, in my chart, is that I have come in with this energy around having to spend some extra time, give some extra focus to that Uranian energy, which in my chart looks a lot like, and my Uranus is at 29 degrees. So that is an important degree in astrology, because it means that it's like you're trying to wrap something up.
Yeah.
To really get the lesson. And so I think that the way that I have seen that show up for me is that I have a lot of rebellious energy just in general, but I have a hard time moving on it because I'm always scared I'm going to get in trouble. I think there's some past life stuff.
Oh, interesting.
Along with that.
So like reviewing your individualism, always kind of having to restock your own individualism, because that's wherever we have Uranus tends to be where we individualize, where we kind of say, this is how I stand apart from the crowd.
Yes. And so I've done a lot of that kind of work over the course of my life, and I'm still doing it.
Wow.
Where is it safe to be an individual, and where do I feel like I need to conform and be a part of the group? And, where do the boundaries of both of those ideas kind of merge and come together? Cool. What about you? Do you have retrogrades in your chart?
Yes, I do. And I also have things which are kind of about to turn retrograde, like planets that are slowing down and then like 5 to 10 days after I was born turn retrograde. So yes, I have quite a few of them. Mars is about to turn retro. Jupiter is about to turn retro in my chart. Saturn is retro, and Pluto, and is it Uranus too? Or maybe about to. I've got a number of them. Okay. It's interesting because when a planet is retrograde, it is furthest from the sun, but it is closest to Earth. So, and this is where I find, it's like the Jyotish or the Vedic Indian astrology is really different than the Western astrology on retrogrades, because they consider a planet which is closest to Earth, therefore being brighter in the sky. So retrogrades mean that, it's hard to see. You're not going to see Pluto in the sky with the naked eye. It's too far away. But if there's Mars retrograde, which is, going to happen, it's going to get bright. And so they think that gives strength to a planet. They see it as being like, it's really giving the planet some oomph. But then Western astrologers are like, oh, now it's acting erratically. It's going to have to redo things. It doesn't do things right the first time. So there's a difference, between both camps on retrogrades, which I find really interesting.
Yeah, I always find that interesting to see how the different schools of astrology will address different things. But I also find that I can find, I can see why it would work both ways. I can make sense of it, where some things are going to feel stronger and then some things are going to feel more erratic, for example. So
unpredictable, because if you also think about it, it's like the planets, I really love the analogy of music to understand astrology. I kind of like the idea of wavelengths and harmony and disharmony. And that's like something that I can grasp onto philosophically. But it's like if a planet goes retrograde, it's kind of going against the natural order. It's kind of saying like, if, the natural order, all the outer planets represent society and culture and the government and infrastructure and the economy and all these sort of big bucket things in your life, where Venus and Mercury are so personal and the moon is so personal to you. So it's kind of like when these guys go retrograde, it's kind of like disharmony in the order of the system, the greater system at large, which I also find kind of a compelling idea.
Yeah.
And what do you think the implications for that could be this fall?
Oh my God. Yeah. We were talking about how we have the elections in the US and how crazy that might be. I mean, it's been 2020 in its entirety has already been one thing after another. But it will be interesting as some of these planets begin to go direct again. So after a planet has been retrograde, where it appears to turn backward, then it will stop and start going direct again. So we were looking, and at the end of September, Saturn, which is the planet of limitations, of government, of following the rules, of tradition, of our inner critic, presumably we have been sort of sifting back through all of that, whatever our relationship to all of those things is, all summer. And I have, every single time that there's some new, rule that comes down, or when there's, something big that happens, I'm always looking at that Saturn like, oh my God, what is the government going to do? Is this right? Is this wrong? What is my own experience? And I think that we've all been doing that to some extent, but it will be interesting. September 29th, it goes direct again.
Wow.
And so, when a planet goes direct, it's the way that I see it. And I want to know how you see this, Julia, but the way that I see it is that all of the work, all of the sifting, all of the insight and knowledge that we have gotten from going back in retrograde and sifting through all of that stuff, then we really get the chance to use it. Things begin to become more clear. The way is sort of, the gate opens. So, I mean, how would you describe it?
I think that that's absolutely dead on, because if you look at like progressions, for example, if somebody's born with a retrograde Venus, and then let's say 20 years later, her progression chart shows that it goes direct. I know this is technical. That's going to be a very significant love year. That's going to be like finally the sort of like, it's kind of like all of those retrograde experiences over that last time, I think, kind of come to a head, and sort of new connections are made and forward progress can happen.
Yeah. So we'll see, hopefully we'll see some forward progress as, it looks like Saturn goes direct in September. Pluto goes direct in October. Neptune goes direct in November. So we'll start. It'll be interesting to see what happens as everyone gets to kind of use what they've learned in the past several months.
Yes. And there's a point in September where literally, oops, there goes my dog, where literally everything from Mars onward, I think from September 10th to the 12th, there are a few days before Jupiter goes direct, where literally everything, it's like, I look at September and I'm just like, don't expect anything to work right now. Just don't expect, and that's a little troubling before the election. I mean, I know it's only a couple of months before, but a lot of infrastructure has to kind of be put in place for things to run smoothly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's part of what is making this year feel so challenging too, is that we're talking about, we have Saturn and Pluto and Jupiter all in the sign of Capricorn, which is so closely related to the government.
Yes.
And, things can get very tricky. And then we have Uranus in Taurus, which is, brings in this whole sort of element of, right and wrong and being disagreed with. It's so funny, I have a Taurus sun, and I have not really fully understood Taurus. I've understood it. It makes sense, but in terms of how it relates to me being a Taurus, it's always been a little bit hard, but I really started to get it when Uranus moved into Taurus, this sense of like not wanting to be disagreed with.
Wow. That is so interesting. Is it on your sun? What degree is your sun?
14.
14. All right. So it's getting there, but it's
coming.
already in the sign. So you're feeling it, man.
Yeah.
I remember when Uranus was over my sun, when it was in Aries and my ascendant. And I mean, I was out there. I think I got like a huge back tattoo and like all just everything I did was just moved sudden and erratically. And yeah. Oh man, the Tauruses of the world, they're gonna
the Tauruses
get even more stubborn.
Exactly. And I think that's part of like what is so activated right now, right? Is that we all have this relationship to the government, whatever it is. Some of us are all about following those rules. Some of us are all about like, screw the rules, whatever. But then we have Uranus in Taurus, which is such another earth sign that says, I'm going to basically need for you to just do it my way. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm going to need for you to agree with me. Thank you. And Uranus is like, I don't want to. So,
oh my God,
we're all kind of, in that energy, and it's clear, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it is very clear. Yep. I mean, like, yeah, the 22 degrees in Capricorn has just been so highlighted ever since that Pluto-Saturn conjunction in January. It has been so highlighted. You know, what's really interesting, sorry, this is a quick aside, but I looked at a chart for when Pluto and Saturn were like perfectly conjoined, and the North Node was in Cancer. And I thought that was really interesting because I feel like all of the seeds sown during that very massive epic conjunction, the North Node can kind of show a little bit of like, what is the future? What is the kind of like, what is the karma you're releasing and what you're kind of heading into? And like, Cancer has been a huge theme this year. People are at home. Everyone I know is cooking. Family is super highlighted right now. It's like we're dealing with a major Cancerian sort of shift. Definitely this year too.
Yeah, and everybody is super security conscious, and some of that darker side of the Cancerian energy, I think, is showing too, where people are very moody.
Tribalism.
Yes.
Yeah, you're so right.
Yeah. It's been interesting. And I think too that, now that the nodes have moved, they've changed signs, and we have South Node in Sagittarius, which is also working out the sort of being a know-it-all energy that we all also have within us.
I particularly have it because I have that natally, and it's taken me a really long time, and astrology also helped me learn that I should be less of a know-it-all.
It's interesting that, Sagittarius and Taurus don't understand each other at all, but they both are such know-it-alls. So maybe that's the common thread in that quincunx.
Oh my goodness. So yeah, a lot of retrogrades this season. Things are very slow. But an interesting foil to that is that in spring of next year, we're going to have a completely different freaking energetic shift. First of all, we're out of that Capricorn stuff. I mean, Pluto's still going to hang out there. But I mean, Jupiter, Saturn, we're focused on Aquarian things. And then because they're both moving in there in about mid-December. And then all the outer planets and everything is going to be moving direct and fast. And the natural order, especially with Aquarius, the sign of order, I think is just going to be moving a lot quicker. It'll, be a much better time to start new things than the fall.
Yeah. So, Julia, what do you think in terms of that shift from Capricorn into Aquarius? What do you think that is going to look like on a sort of on a big picture level for us?
I think that Saturn, the traditional ruler of Aquarius is Saturn, and I like some of the traditional stuff. I definitely think there's associations with Uranus I agree with, but if you think about Saturn, like, what does Saturn have in common with Capricorn and Aquarius? They seem really different. I mean, they're right next to each other in the chart, and when you have planet signs which are right next to each other, then they tend to be rather different. They're different elements, different qualities. But Aquarius there, it's Aquarius is it's a social sign, and Saturn is a social planet. Aquarius is kind of like the side of government that's like, you need to give up some freedoms in order to have more freedom. Like, okay, I know you don't like paying taxes for these roads and these taxes for, a military, but if we lived in total anarchy where we had no roads, no military, you wouldn't be free. Like, it would be scary to leave your house. You couldn't start a new business. You'd be scared of people robbing you left and right. So it's kind of like, I feel like the high side of Saturn, Capricorn is a little bit more of the challenging side, the side that people like to bitch about. But I think that the higher side of Saturn is kind of like, in order to gain more freedom, you have to give up a little bit, to gain more. It's kind of a weird concept, but it's very much the social contract.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hoping that what it's going to look like, and we can always hope, right, is that some of that Capricorn rigidity is going to sort of fade out into more of an overall view of like vision. How does this need to change so that it works better?
Yeah.
Because, things have gotten as we have gotten more and more government, right? I love this idea that you're talking about where it's like, yeah, you have to give up certain things in order to have certain things. And it almost has felt like over the past, let's just say 20 years, that there's been more and more and more and more and more government to the point that it has gotten kind of tight and restrictive. And I'm hoping that the move into Aquarius at least for Saturn and Jupiter, Pluto's coming in a few years, but hopefully that'll open up some sort of breathe some fresh air and some new vision and some new ways of doing things so that we're still getting our needs met, but in revolutionary ways.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think that Aquarius is definitely a sign that kind of, if the group no longer decides that the old rules work, they can make a new order out of them. That's kind of the flexibility of air versus the rigidity of earth. So I think that it could definitely set the stage for a lot of changes of how we work as a society, how we function as a government. Also, the United States on the eve of its Pluto return, all happening at the same time. Like, this is going to be a different country, guys.
That's true. We have the Pluto return, which we have been building on. Oh, yeah. And what degree is that? Is that at 25? Or is it at 27?
It might be a little bit higher than, but I'm not quite sure, actually.
So what we're talking about, in case you're like, what are you guys talking about? In the chart, anytime that we have, if you imagine the zodiac as like a round circle, and anytime that you are born or a country is born or something new is started, you take a snapshot of the chart, which is what we call our natal charts, which is if you get a professional reading with me or Julia, for example, we're reading your natal chart. But when the US was formed, the US got a chart, and Pluto moves so slowly. What does it take? 287 years to go around?
Something around there.
It takes 287 years to go around the entire zodiac. So in your human chart, you'll never have a Pluto return. But in the chart of the US, it means that Pluto has gone all the way around and it's back to where it started. And anytime that we have a return, it's a really big deal. Saturn return, you guys may have heard of. That's what we get when we're around 29 or 30. We have a Chiron return around 50, but basically it is this, it's like we get to step over the threshold into basically what can feel like a whole new reality. And so the USA is doing Pluto return and it's coming up, and because Pluto moves so slowly, we begin to build. So we're feeling it already. Obviously, we look around. But
no, I think that is dead on. I mean, returns, you're starting a new cycle. Planets, you can't think about them just in just these sort of like two-dimensional fixed ways. Like, they're moving, they're part of a process. And the conjunction is a beginning of a new process. Now, Pluto ain't the easiest process, is it?
No, Pluto is really difficult. And I think that's a lot of what we're all feeling right now. And when Julia, you were talking about that 22 degrees, for anyone listening that was confused about that, Pluto and Saturn came into conjunction. They hit the same degree, 22, in the sign of Capricorn this year. Really big deal for both. You know, people will complain about Saturn because Saturn says, hey, you've got to be responsible. You have to take responsibility for your stuff. And a lot of people are like, oh God, I don't want to. And Pluto says, hey, you got to look underneath the surface of what's going on. You got to get real. And everyone's like, no, I don't want to see the shadow. I just want to feel happy. And Pluto's like, screw happiness. That's not where it's at.
Yeah.
So that's what we're dealing with right now. And there's a lot of people, you know, I think, Julia, like for you and me, you know, I love both Saturn and Pluto energy. Like I'm like, ooh, there's the juice. But there's a lot of people that are going kicking and screaming right now because they don't want to do it. And that's a lot of what the energy of this summer has been, is people having to really come face to face with some of these, some of the habitual patterning, some of their beliefs and their morals and their ideas that really are no longer serving.
Yeah.
I think it's going to continue. What do you think?
Oh man, no, I think that's absolutely dead on. And like, you know, what's interesting is to the traditional, so people from Hellenistic astrology, medieval astrology, that era, before people had telescopes, Saturn was the last planet. So Saturn was the boundary of everything. It was the last planet you can see with the naked eye, and you need a telescope to see Uranus and Neptune and Pluto. So Saturn was the limitation. It was the end. It represented time because time is a limitation. It represents work because work is a limitation. All those things that are just crunching down on you. And now for us moderns, it's been like Pluto. Now we've got Eris has been popping into the picture, but for a while Pluto was kind of it too. We just have these, and there's this finality also to Pluto too, and the association with death with both of them as well is kind of interesting. It's you know, Pluto, I mean, a lot of people, for example, go through a Pluto square in a lifetime. Like, you'll never be alive long enough for Pluto to make that full revolution to your chart, but you know, if you live a long life, you'll have the Pluto square. And that's a time of crisis. You know, it sometimes coincides with people's late 30s, early 40s, mid 40s, depending on where. Pluto has a very squished ellipses. So, you know, depending on where you are in the ellipses, it'll hit you at different ages. But it's a time where it's like shadow right in your face, you know. People can act out by having affairs. People can act out by changing their relationship around, changing their life around, you know, usually having to deal with wherever Pluto is natally. Those are going to be issues that are going to come to the fore again. So yeah, this is we have to deal with our dark side. It's going to bring a lot of crisis, and things are going to look really different after.
Yeah. And, you know, I mean, lest you're sitting here starting to panic, it's going to be hard for some people, right? But I think that if you are listening to astrologers, that you are more than likely somebody that is interested in personal growth, right? And that's one of my favorite things about Pluto and about the Plutonian energy, is that it is the energy of, like, you know, psychotherapy, and really using the discomfort that comes up, using the taboo, the chaos as a route for self-discovery of, like, how can I take some of these really uncomfortable things in my life that I've been burying or that I've been numbing,
Right.
I haven't wanted to deal. How can I actually use them and process them and digest them so that I can eliminate and move into, you know, having a more full life, a full experience. And I think that's what a lot of what we're doing in the US is, we are having to look at some of this stuff that has some of this darkness, right? The slavery and the racism, to use that as an example of, this is something that has been very blatant to some, but hovering under the surface to others. And it's like Pluto has brought it out.
Oh, completely.
We all get to look at it and do the personal work and hopefully emerge with a more balanced state of being.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, yes, Pluto is intense, but to me, it's not the planet that I'm not scared of Pluto or Saturn. For some reason, I'm terrified of Neptune. I just have my own, like, oh my God, Neptune freaks me out actually more than Pluto and Saturn. Because it's like with Pluto, if you're just open to the change, you're like, okay. The more open you are to it, like in his book about transits, Rob Hand had this way of describing Pluto transits where he said, be a steward to the change. Allow, if you're kind of open, and if you're trying to resist either with Saturn or Pluto, not going to work out so well. But if you're like, okay, a change is a coming, let's work with it. Let's deal with the dark stuff. Let's take responsibility. It's not easy, but it can be for the best. It totally, I think a lot of Pluto transits, even afterwards, like I had Pluto over my moon in my early 20s. And yeah, there's just a lot of stuff with that. But I have to say, I felt like emotionally reborn after that, that transit. I felt like I was so new emotionally. My relationship needs, my domestic needs, my whole family situation had changed. But like, I kind of felt like, you can, like, Pluto transits can also be rebirths, I think is a good way. It is a death and rebirth process. And there's something hopeful about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I like how you said that. It is that willingness to walk through the fire so that you can rise from the ashes.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of exciting personally.
Yeah. Well, what do you think? Do you think we covered a lot?
Yeah. I think we did good.
I do too. Give us a gold star. All right, cool. Well, maybe we should close it out today. And if anybody who's listening, if you guys have any suggestions for videos or podcasts or anything that me and Natha should talk about, please comment and let us know.
Yeah, for sure. We would love to hear from you because I want to keep doing this, Julia. I love talking with you.
It's fun.
It's always great to connect like this.
Yay. All right, awesome. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to work with me privately or read more about all of the numerous ways to work with me, visit my website, nathacampanella.com. I really appreciate any time that you take to leave a review of this podcast on any of the platforms that you listen on. It helps other people to find it. And of course, if you enjoy this podcast, share it widely and freely with those that you know and love. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.